Some secrets are buried so deep that only the desperate dare to dig them up. In the rain-soaked hills of Portland, where old money hides behind iron gates and whispered legends, the Blackthorn estate loomed like a Gothic monument to forgotten time. Elena Vasquez clutched her cleaning supplies with trembling hands. Her student loan notices crumpled in her coat pocket as she approached the mansion's towering oak doors. She needed this job. Needed it more than pride, more than the nagging voice in her head that warned her about places where the lights never seemed to go out, even at dawn. The estate's elderly caretaker had been clear: clean only the rooms he specified, ask no questions, and never, under any circumstances, disturb the family portraits in the main gallery. But when Elena's flashlight swept across the wall of ornate frames, illuminating decades of faces that seemed to watch her with knowing eyes, she froze. There, in a silver frame that caught the moonlight like captured starlight, was a photograph that made her heart stop. Her mother, young and radiant, wearing a beaded dress from another era, standing beside the very people who had hired her. Her mother, who had supposedly died 20 years ago, smiled back at her from a photograph that couldn't possibly exist. But who takes a picture with vampires and lives to develop it? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Elena's knees buckled, and she gripped the mahogany mantelpiece to keep from collapsing. The photograph stared back at her with impossible clarity, her mother's face exactly as she remembered it from the single, faded snapshot Elena kept hidden in her wallet. But this woman wore pearls that caught gaslight, not fluorescent diner lighting. This woman stood in a grand ballroom, not their cramped studio apartment. The cleaning spray clattered to the marble floor, its chemical scent sharp against the estate's perpetual aroma of old roses and something deeper, earthier, something that reminded Elena of the morgue she'd toured during her clinical rotations. You weren't supposed to see that yet. Elena spun around, her heart hammering against her ribs. A figure emerged from the shadows at the gallery's far end, tall, pale, wearing a perfectly tailored suit that belonged in a museum. His dark hair was slicked back in a style that matched the formal portraits surrounding them, and his eyes held the weight of centuries despite a face that couldn't have been older than 30. "Mr. Blackthorn," Elena whispered, recognizing him from their brief interview 3 days ago. 3 days of sleepless nights where she'd paced her studio apartment, calculating rent versus groceries, student loan payments versus electricity bills. 3 days of convincing herself that any job was better than losing her spot in nursing school. "Please, call me Adrian." His voice carried an accent she couldn't place, British perhaps, but softened by time. "And you're Elena. You have your mother's eyes." The words hit her like ice water. Elena pressed herself against the portrait wall, the silver frame digging into her shoulder blade. "You knew her. You actually knew my mother." "Knew her?" Adrian moved closer, his footsteps silent on the Persian carpet. "I know her still. Isabella is quite remarkable." "Is?" Elena's voice cracked. "She's dead. She died when I was 3. Car accident on Highway 26, they told me. Closed casket funeral because—" The lie caught in her throat. She'd never questioned why she couldn't remember the funeral, why there were no other relatives, why her foster families had always seemed nervous when she asked questions about her past. Adrian's smile was gentle but contained something predatory around the edges. "Your mother made a choice, Elena, a difficult one. She chose immortality over motherhood, eternity over the fleeting warmth of human connection." Elena's nursing training kicked in, the rational part of her mind cataloguing symptoms, hallucinations, auditory disturbances, possible psychotic break brought on by stress and chronic sleep deprivation. People didn't live forever. Vampires existed only in movies and Gothic novels. Yet the photograph felt real beneath her fingertips, and Adrian's presence filled the room like static electricity before a storm. "This is insane," she breathed. "You're talking about vampires like they're real. Like she's—" "Still here?" "She is." Adrian gestured toward the ceiling, where Elena could hear the faint sound of footsteps above. "Would you like to see her?" The offer hung in the air between them, heavy with possibility and terror. Elena thought of her empty apartment, her maxed-out credit cards, her clinical instructor who'd pulled her aside last week to discuss her declining performance. She thought of 20 years of unanswered questions, of waking up screaming from dreams she couldn't remember, of feeling like a ghost haunting her own life. "She abandoned me," Elena said, testing the words. They tasted bitter. "She let me think she was dead. She gave you the gift of a normal life, of mortality, of choices she could no longer make." Adrian's expression softened. "But perhaps it's time you understood the sacrifice." Outside, rain lashed against the gallery's tall windows, and lightning illuminated the grounds beyond, gardens too perfectly maintained, hedgerows too precisely trimmed for any normal household staff. Elena had noticed during her approach that she'd seen no other employees despite the estate's immaculate condition. Her fingers traced the photograph's silver frame, finding an inscription etched along the bottom. "To my darling daughter, may you forgive what I cannot undo. Ivor, 1998. 1998. The year her mother supposedly died." Elena's world tilted on its axis. Every foster home, every night terror, every desperate moment when she'd wished for someone who truly knew her. It all crystallized into a single devastating truth. Her mother hadn't died. She'd chosen to leave. "I need to see her," Elena whispered, surprising herself. The words escaped before fear could stop them, before logic could intervene. "I need to understand why she left me." Adrian nodded as if he'd expected this response. "Very well. But understand, Elena, some doors, once opened, can never be closed again. Some truths change you in ways that can't be undone." Elena looked around the gallery one more time, at the faces that no longer seemed quite human in the moonlight, at the photograph that had shattered everything she'd believed about her life. Her mother was somewhere in this house. After 20 years of emptiness, she finally had a chance for answers, even if those answers came with fangs. Elena's hands trembled as she set the photograph back on the mantelpiece, Adrian's warning echoing in her mind. Some doors, once opened, can never be closed again. The weight of 22 years pressed against her chest. 22 years of believing herself an orphan, of scraping by on determination and sheer stubbornness. "I need time," she whispered, though every cell in her body screamed to run upstairs immediately, to pound on doors until she found the woman who'd haunted her dreams. "I need to think." Adrian inclined his head with an understanding that seemed far too ancient for his youthful face. "Of course, perhaps you should return to your usual routines while you consider. The estate will be here when you're ready." Elena nodded numbly and gathered her cleaning supplies with mechanical precision. Her hands moved automatically. Spray bottle, microfiber cloths, the small vacuum she'd dragged up from the service entrance. Normal tasks, ordinary objects, anchors to a reality that suddenly felt as fragile as tissue paper. The drive back to her studio apartment in southeast Portland passed in a blur of rain-slicked streets and neon reflections. Elena's ancient Honda coughed and wheezed up the 3 flights of stairs to her building, past Mrs. Chen's door with its perpetual smell of star anise, past the college students who played music too loud and left takeout containers in the hallway. Her apartment was a testament to survival, not living. A Murphy bed that she pulled down each morning and folded up each night to create the illusion of space. A kitchenette with a hot plate and mini-fridge because the building's ancient electrical system couldn't handle a real stove. Textbooks stacked everywhere, fundamentals of nursing, pathophysiology, clinical assessment, their spines cracked from overuse because she bought everything second-hand. Elena sank onto her single chair, a garage sale find reupholstered with fabric remnants, and stared at the photograph she kept taped to her bathroom mirror. Her mother at maybe 25, laughing at something off-camera, holding a toddler Elena in a park somewhere. The only proof she'd ever had that someone had once loved her. The woman in that faded snapshot looked nothing like the elegant figure in the silver frame at Blackthorn Estate. This mother wore a faded t-shirt and jeans, had tired eyes and calloused hands. This mother looked human. Her phone buzzed. A text from Marcus, her study partner, and the closest thing she had to a best friend. "Coffee before clinicals tomorrow?" You looked rough in pharmacology today. Elena typed back, "Can't afford coffee." "Rain check?" The response came immediately, "My treat." "You're scaring me, Elle. When's the last time you slept?" She couldn't remember. The insomnia had gotten worse lately, her mind churning through calculations, rent due in 6 days, textbook money for next semester, the clinical placement fee she still hadn't paid. She'd been living on energy drinks and determination, picking up every available shift at the diner while maintaining her grades. Barely. The Blackthorn job was supposed to fix everything. $1,200 a month for weekend cleaning, enough to cover rent and groceries so she could focus on school. She'd been so desperate when she saw the Craigslist posting that she hadn't questioned why someone would pay so much for simple housekeeping. Now she knew. They weren't paying for her cleaning skills. Elena pulled out her nursing school acceptance letter, creased from folding and refolding. She'd read it so many times she'd memorized every word. "Congratulations on your acceptance to the Oregon Health and Science University nursing program. Your academic excellence and commitment to service." This was her way out, her chance to build something meaningful, to help people the way no one had ever helped her. She'd clawed her way through community college while aging out of foster care, worked double shifts at 3 different jobs to save enough for applications and entrance exams. Nursing school represented everything she'd never had: stability, purpose, a future that didn't involve counting quarters for the laundromat. But she was drowning. The program's demands left no time for full-time work, and part-time wages barely covered survival. Last month, she donated plasma twice in 1 week just to make her student loan payment. She'd been eating peanut butter sandwiches for dinner and telling herself it was temporary, that graduation would change everything. The Blackthorn money could save her, would save her, if she could continue working there despite everything. Elena looked around her tiny apartment, at the medical textbooks that represented her dreams, at the eviction notice she'd hidden under a stack of papers, at the single photograph of a mother who might not be dead after all. What did she have to lose? This cramped studio that smelled like the Chinese restaurant downstairs, the exhaustion that made her bones ache, the loneliness that followed her everywhere like a shadow. Or was Adrian right? Were some truths too dangerous to pursue? Some doors better left closed? Outside, rain continued to fall, and somewhere across the city, her mother walked through halls Elena had just cleaned, breathing air that smelled of roses and secrets. Elena stared at the rain-streaked window until her reflection became a ghost superimposed over the city lights. 3 a.m., and sleep remained as elusive as ever. She'd tried lying down twice, but every time she closed her eyes, she saw that photograph. Her mother's face frozen in impossible elegance, wearing pearls that probably cost more than Elena's entire year of tuition. Her phone buzzed against the silence. A text from an unknown number. "The estate appreciates your discretion. Your next shift is scheduled for tomorrow evening at 8 p.m. A." Elena's thumb hovered over the reply button. She could text back a simple no. Delete the number. Pretend none of this had happened. Return to her carefully constructed world of textbooks and double shifts. Let the eviction notice become reality. Drop out of nursing school. Fade back into the anonymous mass of Portland's working poor. Or she could show up tomorrow night and demand answers. The decision was made for her when her laptop chimed with an email notification. Elena's stomach dropped before she even opened it. She recognized the sender address from OHSU's financial aid office. "Ms. Vasquez, this notice serves as a final reminder that your account balance of $3,847 must be paid by Friday, October 13th to maintain your enrollment status. Failure to satisfy this obligation will result in automatic withdrawal from all courses and forfeiture of your clinical placement. Friday. 3 days away." Elena's hands shook as she opened her online banking app. Checking account, $127.43. Savings, $0. The credit cards were maxed. Her plasma donation clinic wouldn't take her again for another week, and she'd already picked up every possible shift at the diner through the weekend. She thought about calling Marcus, but pride stopped her fingers on the keypad. He'd offered help before, but his family's money came with expectations she couldn't meet. Besides, what could she tell him? "Hey, I found my supposedly dead mother living with vampires, and also, I'm about to lose everything we've worked for, unless I go back to their creepy mansion." The rain intensified, drumming against her window like fingertips tapping an impatient rhythm. Elena pulled her mother's photograph from the mirror and held it beside her laptop screen, studying the faces side by side. The faded snapshot showed a woman who looked tired but hopeful, someone who might work double shifts and worry about electric bills. The woman in the silver frame looked like she'd never known the weight of an unpaid bill or the exhaustion of survival. Which version was real? Which mother had she actually lost? Elena's phone buzzed again, this time with a call from an Oregon area code she didn't recognize. Against her better judgment, she answered. "Elena." The voice was Adrian's, smooth and oddly comforting despite everything. "I apologize for calling so late. I suspected you might be awake." "How did you get this number?" But even as she asked, Elena realized she'd provided it on her employment application, back when she'd thought this was just an eccentric rich family's housekeeping job. "I wanted to offer you something," Adrian continued, ignoring her question. "A demonstration of good faith. Your mother asked me to give this to you should you ever—" He paused. "Should circumstances bring you back into our lives?" Elena's breath caught. She knew. She knew I might find out. "Isabella has been watching over you from a distance. She knows about nursing school, about your struggles. She's quite proud of your determination." Adrian's voice carried genuine warmth. She wanted to help, but the terms of her transformation forbid direct contact with her former life, unless you chose to seek her out yourself. "That's convenient," Elena said, but the bitterness in her voice felt hollow. How many nights had she wished for a mother's guidance, for someone who understood her dreams and fears? How many times had she felt utterly alone in a world that seemed designed to break people like her? "There's an envelope waiting for you at the estate," Adrian said. "Your mother's words, written in her own hand. But more than that, she wanted to ensure your education could continue, regardless of your decision about seeing her. Consider it a mother's gift. 20 years overdue." Elena's financial aid screen blurred through sudden tears. "You're bribing me. I'm offering you what your mother cannot give directly. The security to make your choice freely, without desperation clouding your judgment." Adrian's voice gentled. "Whether you read her letter, whether you ever speak to her again, that envelope ensures you can finish what you've started, become the healer you're meant to be." The weight of 3 days pressed against Elena's chest. 3 days to find nearly $4,000 or watch her future crumble. 3 days to decide whether discovering the truth about her mother was worth entering a world where such truths came with fangs and centuries-old secrets. "If I come tomorrow night," Elena whispered, "if I take the envelope, does that mean I'm choosing her world over mine?" "It means you're choosing to have choices," Adrian replied. "Something your mother never had at the end." The line went dead, leaving Elena alone with the rain and the impossible decision that would define the rest of her life. Elena stared at her phone's black screen until her eyes burned. The silence in her apartment felt suffocating, broken only by the steady drumming of rain and the distant hum of the building's ancient heating system. She set the phone aside and buried her face in her hands, inhaling the lingering scent of industrial disinfectant from her shift at the diner, a smell that had become as much a part of her as her own skin. "Your mother never had choices." Adrian's words echoed in the cramped space, seeming to bounce off her textbooks and unpaid bills like accusations. What did that mean? What circumstances could force someone to abandon their child and fake their own death? Elena's rational mind supplied answers she didn't want to consider. Addiction, mental illness, abuse, things that would make leaving seem like mercy rather than abandonment. But none of those explanations accounted for the photograph, for the way Adrian moved through shadows without disturbing them, for the unnatural perfection of the Blackthorn Estates grounds. maintained by staff she'd never seen. Elena pulled her laptop closer and opened a new browser tab, her fingers hovering over the keyboard before typing Blackthorn Estate Portland history. The search returned surprisingly little: a few real estate transactions dating back to 1924, a brief mention in a historical society newsletter about Victorian architecture preservation, and a decades-old newspaper clipping about a society party that mentioned the enigmatic Blackthorn family's annual autumn gathering. She tried searching for her mother's name: Isabella Vasquez, Isabella Martinez. Every variation she could think of. Nothing recent appeared beyond Elena's own scattered digital footprint. No obituary from 2001, which should have existed if the car accident story were true. No death certificate, no funeral home records. The absence of evidence felt louder than proof would have been. Elena pushed the laptop away and walked to her tiny bathroom, splashing cold water on her face. The woman in the mirror looked haggard, dark circles under eyes too large for her thin face, cheekbones sharp from skipped meals, hair that needed cutting but couldn't be afforded. She looked like someone who'd been surviving instead of living, someone who'd learned to expect disappointment as surely as gravity. Was this who her mother had seen in that final moment before choosing immortality? A daughter who would struggle and scrape and never quite belong anywhere. Maybe leaving had been the kindest option, sparing Elena from whatever darkness had claimed Isabella Vasquez's life. The thought sent a familiar spike of pain through Elena's chest, the same ache that had followed her through childhood whenever she'd seen other kids with their mothers. She'd trained herself not to want what she couldn't have, but tonight that careful discipline crumbled under the weight of possibility. Her mother was alive. After 20 years of emptiness, of feeling like she was missing some essential piece of herself, Elena finally knew why nothing had ever felt quite right. The woman who should have taught her to braid her hair, who should have helped with homework and dating advice and college applications, she wasn't gone. She was 30 minutes away, walking through hallways Elena had cleaned with her own hands. Elena returned to her main room and sat heavily in her garage sale chair. The financial aid email still glowed on her screen, its deadline counting down with merciless precision. 3 days to find nearly $4,000. She'd already calculated every possible option. Selling her car would cover maybe half the debt but leave her stranded, unable to work or attend clinicals. Dropping out now would mean starting over completely if she ever saved enough to try again. And at 22, with no family safety net, how many chances would she realistically get? The smart choice was obvious. Go to the estate tomorrow night, take whatever envelope Adrian had mentioned, use the money to stay in school, avoid her mother entirely if necessary. Treat it like any other job. Show up, do the work, collect payment, leave personal feelings at the door. But Elena had learned long ago that things which seemed too good to be true usually were. What would accepting her mother's money cost? What strings would be attached? What kind of debt would she be incurring to people, creatures, who measured their existence in centuries rather than decades? She thought about Marcus and their study group, about the clinical instructor who'd started treating her like a real nurse instead of just another struggling student. About Mrs. Patterson, the patient who'd specifically asked for Elena during her last diner shift because you actually listen, honey. These were the connections she'd built from nothing, the life she'd clawed together from determination and stubbornness. Was she willing to risk all of it for answers to questions that had tormented her since childhood? Was the chance to understand her past worth potentially destroying her future? Outside, lightning illuminated the Portland skyline, and Elena imagined she could feel the pull of Blackthorn Estate from across the city. Her mother's presence like a gravitational force she'd been unconsciously fighting her entire life. Tomorrow night, she would have to choose between the safety of ignorance and the terrible gift of truth. The morning arrived grey and unforgiving, matching Elena's mood as she sat through her pharmacology lecture with gritty eyes and a mind that refused to focus. Professor Martinez's voice droned through medication classifications while Elena's pen traced circles in her notebook margins, each loop another hour closer to her 8 o'clock appointment with destiny. Miss Vasquez. The professor's sharp tone cut through her distraction. Perhaps you'd like to share your thoughts on beta-blocker contraindications? Elena's cheeks burned as 23 pairs of eyes turned toward her. She managed to stumble through an answer about asthma and heart failure, drawing on knowledge she'd absorbed through sheer repetition rather than any conscious attention she'd paid to today's lecture. Marcus caught up with her in the hallway afterward, his concern evident in the way he matched her hurried pace. "Okay, what's going on? You've been weird for days, and today you look like you haven't slept in a week." "I'm fine." The lie came easily, practiced from years of deflecting well-meaning questions about her circumstances. Just stressed about clinicals. Bullshit. Marcus stepped in front of her, forcing her to stop. His sandy hair fell across his forehead in a way that reminded Elena why half their study group had crushes on him, but his blue eyes held nothing but genuine worry. "Elle, I've known you for 2 years. You don't get rattled by clinical rotations. You're the one who talked," Sarah threw her first 4 insertion when she was having a panic attack. Elena shifted her backpack higher on her shoulder, the weight of her textbooks feeling heavier than usual. Around them, other nursing students streamed past in scrubs and lab coats, chattering about patient assignments and upcoming exams. Their normalcy made her feel like an alien observing human behavior from the outside. "There's something I have to do tonight," she said finally. "Something important." Marcus's expression softened. "Want company? Moral support?" The offer was tempting. Marcus represented safety, the rational world of evidence-based practice and measurable outcomes. But where she was going, his presence would only complicate an already impossible situation. How could she explain that she was voluntarily walking into what might be a vampire's lair to confront her supposedly dead mother? "I have to do this alone," Elena said. "But thank you for always offering to help, even when I'm too proud to accept it." Something in her tone must have conveyed finality, because Marcus stepped aside. "Just be careful, okay? Whatever this is about, don't let it derail everything you've worked for." If only he knew how close she already was to losing everything. The rest of the day passed in a haze of forced normalcy. Elena attended her clinical skills lab, practiced medication administration on plastic mannequins, and pretended her hands weren't shaking every time she thought about tonight. She picked up a shift at the diner during the dinner rush, serving coffee and comfort food to customers who had no idea their waitress was about to cross a threshold that would fundamentally alter her understanding of reality. At 6:30, Elena stood in her apartment shower, letting hot water wash away the smell of grease and other people's conversations. The steam fogged her bathroom mirror, obscuring the photograph of her mother that had served as her only connection to the past. When she wiped the glass clear, her own reflection stared back, and for a moment she could see resemblance to the elegant woman in the silver frame. The same dark eyes, the same determined set to the jaw. Maybe this was always inevitable. Maybe some gravitational pull had been drawing her toward this moment since birth, like a planet slowly spiraling toward its star. Elena dressed carefully, choosing jeans and a sweater that would be appropriate for cleaning but substantial enough to provide psychological armor. She packed her grandmother's rosary, a talisman from her only other connection to family, and tucked it into her pocket. As an afterthought, she grabbed her nursing school acceptance letter and folded it into her wallet, a reminder of who she was and what she stood to lose. At 7:45, Elena locked her apartment door and walked down the dim stairwell for what might be the last time as the person she'd always been. Mrs. Chen's star anise still perfumed the second-floor hallway. The college students' music still thumped through thin walls. Everything remained exactly the same, while Elena felt herself transforming with each step toward the building's exit. Her car started reluctantly in the cold October air, and she drove through Portland's rain-slicked streets with the methodical precision of someone attending their own execution, past the coffee shops where she'd studied for entrance exams, past the plasma donation clinic that had helped fund her textbooks, past the community college where she'd first dared to dream of becoming something more than circumstances had promised. At exactly 8 o'clock, Elena pulled through the wrought-iron gates of Blackthorn Estate. The mansion's windows glowed like watching eyes, and she knew that crossing this threshold would mean abandoning the safety of ignorance forever. She turned off the engine and stepped into her new reality. The front door opened before Elena could knock, as if the house itself had been watching for her arrival. Adrian stood in the doorway, his pale features softened by warm lamplight, though his dark eyes held an intensity that made her instinctively step back. "Elena, I'm glad you came." He moved aside to let her enter, and she caught that same subtle wrongness in his movements. Too fluid, too quiet. "Your mother's envelope is waiting in the study, but first, there are things you need to understand about this house. About us." The foyer felt different tonight, charged with an electricity that made her skin prickle. Elena's fingers found her grandmother's rosary through her pocket, the familiar beads grounding her as she followed Adrian deeper into the mansion. The portraits she dusted just days ago seemed to watch her passage with knowing eyes. "The first rule," Adrian said as they walked, "is that nothing you see or hear leaves these walls without permission. The second is that you never enter the east wing after midnight. The third," he paused at an ornate door Elena hadn't noticed before, "the third is that you trust nothing completely, including me." "That's reassuring," Elena muttered, but her sarcasm felt brittle. Adrian's mouth curved in what might have been amusement. "Honesty is a luxury in our world. I'm offering it as a gift." He opened the door to reveal a library that belonged in a museum, floor-to-ceiling mahogany shelves, leather-bound volumes that looked centuries old, and a fireplace large enough to stand in. "Someone wants to meet you." A woman emerged from the shadows between the stacks, moving with the same unsettling grace as Adrian. She appeared to be in her 50s, with silver-streaked hair and sharp features that might have been beautiful once. Her clothes suggested old money, tailored wool and understated jewelry, but her eyes held an ancient weariness that made Elena's breath catch. "This is Catherine," Adrian said. "She helps new arrivals understand our unique circumstances." "You're human," Catherine observed, studying Elena with scientific interest. "Completely human. How refreshing." She circled Elena slowly, like a curator examining a new acquisition. "Your mother spoke of you often, especially in the early years. Before she learned to let go." Elena's hands clenched into fists. "Where is she?" "Hunting," Catherine said matter-of-factly. "She feeds on alternate nights. A necessary routine, you understand." The casual mention of feeding sent ice through Elena's veins. "Feeds on what?" Catherine's smile revealed teeth that were too sharp, too white. "Oh, we're very civilized about it these days. Blood banks, medical waste, the occasional willing donor who thinks they're indulging a fetish." She waved a dismissive hand. "Nothing like the old days, when we had to be quite creative." Elena backed toward the door, but Adrian was somehow already there, blocking her path. "Easy," he said, his voice carrying an odd resonance that made her muscles relax against her will. "Catherine has a peculiar sense of humor. We're not going to hurt you." "You could," Catherine continued conversationally. "Hurt me, I mean. Your blood carries something interesting, a genetic marker that makes our kind rather volatile around you. It's part of why Isabella chose to leave when she did. Being near you as a newborn vampire might have triggered instincts she couldn't control." The room tilted around Elena. She groped for the nearest chair, her nursing training automatically cataloguing symptoms: rapid pulse, shallow breathing, cold sweats. Shock. She was going into shock. "You're saying she left to protect me?" "Among other reasons." Catherine settled into the chair across from her, every movement deliberate and predatory. "The transformation is difficult. For the first decade, we're barely more than intelligent animals. Hunger overrides everything. Love, loyalty, maternal instinct. Isabella was wise to distance herself. But she's been watching," Adrian added quickly. "Once she gained control, she's kept track of your progress, your school records, your work history. She knows about Marcus, about your financial struggles. She's proud of what you've accomplished." Elena's laugh came out harsh and broken. 20 years of abandonment, And I'm supposed to be grateful for supernatural stalking. You're supposed to understand that love sometimes requires impossible choices, a new voice said from the doorway. Elena turned to see a man who looked barely older than herself, with dark hair and features that would have been beautiful, if not for the same predatory stillness that marked the others. But his eyes held a gentleness that the others lacked, a sadness that seemed almost human. "This is Thomas," Adrian explained. "He was like you, once, before." "Before I chose this," Thomas said, moving to perch on the edge of the desk. "I was dying, cancer. Isabella found me in the hospital where she sometimes volunteers. Yes, she still helps people when she can. She told me about the choice she'd made, about the daughter she'd had to leave behind. She helped me understand what I'd be giving up." Elena stared at him. "You chose this knowing you'd lose everyone you loved?" "I chose this knowing I could love differently." Thomas's smile was tinged with centuries-old grief. "Your mother didn't make that choice for herself. She made it for you." The words hung in the air like a challenge, and Elena felt something fracture inside her chest, not breaking, but shifting, like tectonic plates finding new positions after an earthquake. She stood abruptly, pacing to the massive fireplace where flames cast dancing shadows across oil paintings of long-dead blackthorns. "For me," she repeated, her voice hollow. "She chose immortality for me. That's supposed to make sense?" Thomas followed her movement with eyes that tracked too precisely, too focused. "She was 19 when she had you. Alone, terrified, barely surviving on minimum-wage jobs. When the offer came—" "What offer?" Elena spun to face the room, her composure finally cracking. "Someone just walked up to my teenage mother and said, 'Hey, want to live forever, but you'll have to abandon your child? Is that how this works?'" Catherine laughed, the sound like breaking glass. "Oh, it's much more seductive than that. We don't recruit from the happy and fulfilled, dear. We find the desperate, the dying, the ones who've run out of choices. Your mother was about to lose her apartment. You were sick, recurring ear infections that required expensive antibiotics she couldn't afford." Elena's hand went unconsciously to her left ear, where a faint scar marked childhood surgeries she'd never questioned. Her grandmother had always said they couldn't afford the best doctors, that they'd done what they could with free clinics and payment plans. "Isabella was working 3 jobs and still couldn't keep up," Adrian continued, his voice carefully neutral. "The transformation offered a solution. Financial security for you. A foster placement with a family who could provide what she couldn't. She thought she was saving your life by sacrificing hers." Elena's nursing instincts kicked in, analyzing the situation with clinical detachment. "How long does the transformation take?" "Years," Thomas answered. "The physical change happens quickly, within days, but learning control, maintaining humanity, remembering why we chose to preserve our capacity for love instead of surrendering to hunger, that takes decades." Elena found herself studying his face, searching for tells, for signs of deception. In the emergency department, she'd learned to read people quickly, who was hiding drug use, who was exaggerating pain, who was genuinely afraid versus who was seeking attention. But Thomas's grief seemed authentic, layered with the kind of complexity that came from real loss. "Show me," she said suddenly. The 3 vampires exchanged glances. "Show you what?" Adrian asked carefully. "What you are. Really." Elena's voice strengthened with decision. "I'm a nursing student. I understand anatomy, physiology, medical impossibilities. If you want me to believe any of this, if you want me to understand my mother's choice, then stop hiding behind parlor tricks and show me the truth." Catherine clapped slowly, her sharp smile widening. "Oh, I do like her. She has your directness, Isabella, but with a spine you never quite developed." "Catherine," Adrian warned, but Elena was already moving toward her. "You want to see a monster?" Catherine rose with liquid grace, and something fundamental shifted in her posture, her expression. The careful humanity she'd been wearing fell away like a discarded mask. Her pupils dilated until her eyes became black voids, and when she smiled, her canines extended into genuine fangs. "This is what your mother became. This is what she chose over you." Elena's medical training warred with primal terror as Catherine moved closer. She could see the predator now, in the way Catherine's head tilted, listening to Elena's racing heartbeat, in how her nostrils flared slightly as if scenting prey. This wasn't Hollywood dramatics or special effects. This was apex predator biology, evolution twisted into something that should not exist. But Elena didn't run. Instead, she stepped closer, studying Catherine's transformed features with the same clinical fascination she'd shown during cadaver labs. "Your cardiovascular system," she murmured. "It's still functioning, but differently. Pupils that dilated suggest altered nervous system response. The dental modifications, do they retract completely, or is there always some structural change?" Catherine blinked, her predatory stance faltering slightly. "You're asking about dental anatomy?" "I'm trying to understand the physiology of what my mother became." Elena reached out, stopping just short of Catherine's face. "Because if I'm going to judge her choice, I need to understand what she was choosing between." Thomas laughed suddenly, the sound warm and genuinely delighted. "She really is Isabella's daughter. Do you remember, Catherine, when Isabella spent her first month asking Dr. Whitmore to explain the biochemistry of blood coagulation?" Catherine's features gradually returned to human normal, though wariness remained in her expression. "Most people scream," she admitted. "Most people aren't nursing students who've seen what real trauma looks like," Elena replied. "This is—" She gestured at Catherine's now human face. "Terrifying, impossible, completely outside everything I thought I knew about biology. But it's not evil. It's just other." The admission surprised her. Standing in this library, surrounded by creatures that shouldn't exist, Elena felt something she'd rarely experienced. The sensation of puzzle pieces clicking into place. Not answers exactly, but the framework for understanding that answers might exist. "I want to see her," Elena said, turning back to Adrian. "Tonight. Before I decide whether to stay or run, I want to hear her explanation." "In person?" Adrian nodded slowly. "She'll be back within the hour. But Elena, once you meet her, once you hear her story directly, there's no returning to ignorance. Are you prepared for that?" Elena thought of Marcus, of her clinical rotations, of the life she'd built from nothing but determination. Then she thought of 20 years of emptiness, of feeling incomplete in ways she'd never been able to articulate. "I've been preparing for this my whole life," she said. "I just didn't know it." The hour passed like a held breath. Elena found herself pacing the library's Persian carpet, her fingers worrying her grandmother's rosary while Thomas attempted casual conversation about her nursing studies. But every topic felt surreal when discussed with someone who claimed to have died of cancer decades ago, and Catherine's occasional knowing looks made concentration impossible. When the front door's heavy oak finally groaned open, Elena's heart hammered against her ribs with such force, she wondered if the vampires could hear it echoing through the mansion's halls. Footsteps approached, too light, too measured, and Elena realized this was it. 22 years of wondering, of filling the mother-shaped void with fantasies and resentment, was about to collide with impossible reality. The library door opened, and a woman stepped inside. Elena's breath caught. The face from the silver-framed photograph stood before her, virtually unchanged except for an otherworldly pallor and eyes that held depths no human gaze should possess. Her mother, Isabella, wore modern clothes now, dark jeans and a cashmere sweater, but she moved with that same predatory grace Elena was learning to recognize. She was beautiful in the way dangerous things often were, like a blade catching light. "Elena." Isabella's voice carried an accent Elena didn't remember, something faintly European that hadn't existed in her childhood memories. "My God, you're so tall. You have your father's height." The casual mention of a father Elena had never known about hit like a physical blow. "You remember my father?" "Miguel worked at the restaurant where I waited tables." Isabella's smile was tentative, uncertain. "You have his hands too. Long fingers, good for delicate work." He would have been proud to know you became a nurse. Would have been. Elena's voice cracked, despite her efforts to maintain composure. Car accident, 3 years after you were born. He never knew about you. I was too proud to tell him when I found out I was pregnant. Isabella moved closer, and Elena caught a scent like winter air and something metallic underneath. There's so much you don't know, mi amor. So much I wanted to tell you. Elena backed away instinctively. Don't call me that. You lost the right to endearments when you faked your death. I didn't fake anything. Isabella's composure cracked, revealing something raw beneath. I died, Elena. The woman who gave birth to you, who sang you lullabies and worried about your fevers. She died when I accepted this transformation. What I became afterward was something else entirely. Something that could have chosen differently. Elena's training in crisis intervention kicked in, providing emotional distance through clinical observation. Her mother's micro-expressions suggested genuine distress, but also something predatory lurking beneath manufactured humanity. You could have found another way. Could I? Isabella moved to the window, staring out at grounds shrouded in October darkness. You were going to die, Elena. The infections were getting worse, becoming resistant to treatment. The free clinic doctors told me to prepare for the possibility of permanent hearing damage, maybe worse. I was working 16-hour days and still couldn't afford the specialists you needed. Elena's hand went again to her scarred ear, memories surfacing of nights when pain had been her constant companion. She'd always assumed her grandmother's devotion had been enough to pull her through, but now she wondered what other factors had influenced her recovery. Dr. Whitmore, he's one of us. He arranged for the best pediatric specialists to take your case pro bono, Isabella continued. New antibiotics, surgical procedures that weren't available through normal channels. He saved your life, but the price was mine. The price was your choice, Elena shot back, though doubt was creeping into her voice. You could have found other options. Applied for aid programs, talked to social workers. I was 19 years old. Isabella's careful control shattered, and for a moment Elena glimpsed the terrified teenager her mother had been. I had no family, no education, no resources. When Dr. Whitmore explained what the transformation would mean, that I could ensure your care but would have to disappear from your life, it felt like the only love I had left to give. The library fell silent except for the fire's crackling. Elena stared at this stranger who wore her mother's face, trying to reconcile the abandonment that had shaped her entire identity with the desperate maternal love Isabella claimed had motivated every choice. I watched, Isabella whispered. From a distance, through Dr. Whitmore's connections, through friends who could pass for human. Your first day of school, your graduation, when you got accepted to nursing school. I was so proud, so grateful you'd become exactly who you were meant to be. Without you. The words came out as an accusation, but Elena heard her own uncertainty bleeding through. Because of my absence, Isabella corrected. You learned independence, determination, how to survive anything life threw at you. Those qualities, they're what I hoped the sacrifice would give you. Elena felt her carefully constructed worldview crumbling, each revelation reshaping the narrative she'd built around her mother's abandonment, the greatest fear she'd carried, that she'd been fundamentally unlovable, unwanted, was being replaced by something potentially more devastating. The possibility that she'd been loved so completely that her mother had chosen to become a monster to save her. Elena's knees buckled, and she sank into the nearest chair as the full weight of her mother's words settled over her like a suffocating blanket. 22 years of carefully constructed identity, the abandoned daughter, the survivor who needed no one, the woman who'd built herself from nothing because nothing was all she'd ever had, cracked apart like ice under spring sun. You're lying, she whispered, but the words held no conviction. Every detail fit too perfectly with fragments of memory she'd never fully examined, the sudden appearance of better doctors when she was 4, the mysterious benefactors who'd helped pay for her grandmother's medications, the scholarship that had appeared from nowhere when she'd applied to nursing school. Isabella knelt beside her chair, moving with that unnaturally fluid grace. The scholarship, Friends of Medical Education Foundation, do you remember? Dr. Whitmore established it specifically for you. He's been ensuring you had opportunities I never could have provided. Elena's medical training kicked in automatically, cataloging her symptoms: hyperventilation, cold sweats, peripheral vision narrowing, classic signs of panic attack. But knowing the physiology couldn't stop the emotional hemorrhage, as every anchor point of her identity dissolved. "I needed you," she said, the words ripping from somewhere deep in her chest. "When I was 8 and had nightmares about car crashes, when I started my period and had to figure it out from library books, when Abuela died and I had to sign the DNR alone because I was her only family. I needed my mother, not some supernatural puppet master pulling strings from the shadows." Isabella's face crumpled, revealing an anguish that looked too raw, too human for a creature Catherine claimed was barely more than an intelligent animal. "Don't you think I knew that? Every milestone I missed felt like losing you all over again. But Elena, if I had stayed—" "Stop!" Elena lurched to her feet, pacing toward the fireplace with movements that felt disconnected from her body. "Just stop with the justifications. You made a choice. Maybe it was the only choice you could see. Maybe it was even the right choice, but it was still a choice that destroyed my entire understanding of myself." The room fell, deadly quiet. Even Thomas, who'd been a reassuring presence during the evening's earlier revelations, seemed to shrink back from the grief radiating off Elena in waves. "I spent my entire life believing I was unwanted," Elena continued, her voice gaining strength born of fury. "Do you understand what that does to a person? How it shapes every relationship, every decision? I've never been able to trust that anyone would stay because my own mother couldn't love me enough to fight for alternatives. But I did love you enough. You loved me enough to leave." Elena spun around, tears streaming down her face. "And maybe that was noble. Maybe it was necessary. But it doesn't change what it cost. It doesn't change that I've spent 22 years being afraid to need anyone, because needing people means they can abandon you." Isabella stood slowly, her supernatural composure completely shattered. For the first time since entering the library, she looked genuinely vulnerable. Not predator wearing human skin, but a mother confronting the unintended consequences of impossible choices. "Marcus," Elena said suddenly, the name hitting her like a revelation. "God, Marcus. I've been pushing him away for months because I was terrified he'd leave like you did. I've been sabotaging the first real relationship I've ever had because I couldn't trust that love doesn't always end in abandonment." The irony was devastating. Her mother's sacrifice had been motivated by love, but the absence it created had convinced Elena that she was fundamentally unlovable. Every wall she'd built, every person she'd kept at arm's length, every moment of crushing loneliness, all of it stemmed from a narrative that was apparently false. "I've lost him," she whispered, sinking back into the chair as the full scope of destruction became clear. "He tried to tell me he cared, tried to break through my walls, and I kept pushing because I was convinced he'd leave anyway. Just like everyone leaves." "Elena!" Isabella reached toward her, but Elena flinched away. "Don't. Please don't touch me right now." Elena wrapped her arms around herself, feeling like she was coming apart at the molecular level. "I need to process this. I need to figure out who I am, if everything I believed about my past is wrong." She looked up at Isabella, taking in the supernatural perfection, the otherworldly beauty that would never age, never change. "You got your immortality. You saved my life, ensured my opportunities, watched from the shadows as I grew up exactly as you hoped. But the cost, it wasn't just your humanity. It was my ability to trust love when I found it." The words hung in the air like an indictment. Elena had come seeking answers, but the truth was more devastating than any lie could have been. Her mother had loved her enough to die for her, and that love had inadvertently taught Elena that she wasn't worth living for.